The city never truly slept. Even in the late hours, its neon lights painted the glass towers with restless color, and the hum of life pulsed through every street. But high, above that noise, in a glittering penthouse that overlooked it all, a very different kind of story was unfolding, one that no one dared to stop. Behind thick walls and tinted glass, a pregnant woman sat on the marble floor, her back pressed against a golden-trimmed wall. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her hands trembling as she clutched her swollen belly. The dim light from a chandelier above scattered diamonds across the floor, glinting off her tears. Across the room stood her husband Alexander Crane, one of the most powerful CEOs in the city. His name alone could buy silence, and his fortune ensured that no one questioned what happened behind closed doors. His anger was cold, calculated, the kind that didn't need shouting to be terrifying. Yet tonight, even his control faltered. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my board?" he snarled, stepping closer. His reflection glimmered in the wide glass window behind him, a man who owned everything except the kindness he had once pretended to have. The woman flinched, tears slipping down her cheek. She didn't argue anymore. She had learned that words only made it worse. Somewhere deep inside, she clung to the tiny heartbeat within her, the only reason she endured. Every time he raised his voice, she whispered to the life inside her, "Hold on, little one. We'll be free someday." Down below, the streets glimmered with rain and city lights, oblivious to the suffering happening above. Neighbors had heard the noise before, shouts breaking glass, muffled cries, but they had families, jobs, reputations. No one wanted to cross Alexander Crane. His power reached too far, his lawyers too quick, his threats too real. And so, they did what the world too often does. They turned up the volume of their televisions and looked away. Emma's sobs grew quieter. She could barely move. She wanted to scream, to run, to beg anyone for help. But who would come? Who would believe her against a man whose face smiled from every magazine cover? Outside, a faint rumble echoed through the night. At first it was easy to mistake it for thunder, but it was too steady, too rhythmic. It grew louder, rolling through the empty streets like a warning. Emma didn't notice yet, but fate had already begun to stir on roaring engines and determined hearts. While the world watched in silence, something unexpected was about to break that stillness. And from that moment on, everything would change. Because kindness has many faces, and sometimes it wears leather and rides a motorcycle. Pure Hub kindness reminds us that courage can rise even when the world turns away. The city streets were slick with rain, reflecting the blur of neon lights and endless noise. It was nearly midnight when the low growl of motorcycle engines cut through the hum of traffic. One by one, the bikes emerged from the mist, chrome and steel machines gliding through the night like shadows with purpose. At the front, rode Ryder, a broad-shouldered man with years of road dust on his jacket and a quiet strength in his eyes. He wasn't the type who looked for trouble, but trouble always seemed to find him, especially when someone was being hurt. Behind him followed his crew. 6 bikers bound, not by blood, but by loyalty and an unspoken code. Protect those who can't protect themselves. They called themselves the Ironhearts. Despite their rough looks, tattoos, leather scars, they were known across towns for helping people no one else dared to stand up for. Homeless veterans, bullied kids, abandoned mothers, people society forgot. Tonight, they had stopped at a small roadside diner to grab coffee before heading home when a frantic waitress mentioned what she'd overheard from a customer. A rich man downtown, always shouting at his pregnant wife. Neighbors too scared to report it. Ryder had gone quiet at those words. His jaw tightened. "Addressed?" he asked. The waitress hesitated, whispering it like a secret, afraid even of the name. But Ryder's mind was already made up. He didn't care who the man was. No amount of money justified cruelty. Minutes later, the Ironhearts roared back onto the streets, engines echoing like thunder through the city canyons. Pedestrians turned to look, startled by the sight. 7 riders in black, cutting through the rain with a single purpose. They weren't vigilantes. They weren't heroes in capes. They were men who simply couldn't stand by while evil hid behind wealth. The rain fell harder as they reached the upscale neighborhood where Alexander Crane lived. Marble gates, tall guards, and luxury cars lined the driveways. Everything was perfect on the surface. But behind one of those glass walls, the sound of someone's pain was hidden beneath the hum of the city. The bikers parked at the curb, engines still running, steam rising from the pavement beneath their tires. Ryder removed his helmet, his sharp eyes studying the towering building. "Top floor," one of the riders said, pointing to the faint flicker of light in the penthouse window. A shadow moved across it, then vanished. Ryder nodded once. "Then that's where we're going." They didn't care about the man's title, his power, or his money. They cared about the woman crying behind that glass. And as they began walking toward the building entrance, dripping rain and determination, a sense of stillness filled the air as if the city itself held its breath. Because for the first time, someone wasn't looking away. Pure Hub kindness reminds us that bravery often arrives uninvited, but right on time. Inside the penthouse, the storm outside had faded into a dull hum against the glass. but the tension within those walls was deafening. Emma sat motionless on the floor, her back pressed to the cold marble, her body trembling as Alexander paced in front of her. His tie hung loose, his shirt collar open, but his expression was as sharp as the knives glinting on the nearby counter. "You should be grateful," he hissed, his voice smooth yet venomous. "No one else would ever take care of you the way I have. You think anyone would believe your lies about me?" Emma didn't answer. Every word he spoke cut deeper than the last. She knew his game: humiliate her, isolate her, then break her completely. But something was changing tonight. For the first time, her fear didn't feel endless. Somewhere deep inside, a fragile spark flickered, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was about to end. Then, faintly, she heard it. A low rumble beneath the storm. It wasn't thunder. It was rhythmic, steady like the beating of 1,000 hearts. Alexander paused, his brow furrowing as he turned toward the window. "What's that noise?" he muttered. Outside, the night split open with the roar of engines. The street below glowed with the reflection of headlights and the glint of wet asphalt. 7 motorcycles lined up in formation at the curb, their engines purring like lions ready to strike. The bikers dismounted slowly, each movement deliberate, every step echoing strength and purpose. Security guards stationed at the gate hesitated. They recognized the look in those men's eyes. It wasn't anger. It was conviction. One guard reached for his radio, but before he could speak, Ryder lifted his gaze to the penthouse window far above and murmured, "Top floor. She's there." Emma's eyes widened as she caught sight of movement far below. Through the glass, she saw the faint glimmer of headlights, the blurred figures of men standing in the rain. Her heart skipped. Could it be? Were they here for her? It seemed impossible. Who would dare? A loud knock broke through the tension. Bang, bang, bang. It echoed through the penthouse like a promise. Alexander froze. His arrogance faltered for a fraction of a second. "Stay here," he growled, striding toward the door. But before he could reach it, a voice came through. Calm and commanding. "Alexander Crane." The man said, "You've had your fun. It's over now." The CEO's face twisted with rage. "Who the hell do you think you are?" From the other side came a reply that would be remembered by everyone in that building for years to come. "People who don't look away." The door creaked open an inch, and Ryder's eyes met Emma's from across the room. That brief moment, her fear meeting his determination, was enough to shift the balance. The silence that followed wasn't fear anymore. It was the beginning of justice. Pure hub, kindness reminds us that even a whisper of courage can silence the loudest cruelty. For a few seconds, everything stood still. The city lights flickered through the tall glass windows, glinting off the polished marble floor. The only sound was the steady tap of rain against the glass, and the heavy footsteps of the bikers entering the penthouse. Alexander Crane took a step back, confusion twisting into fury. "You can't just walk in here," he shouted, his voice echoing through the vast room. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Ryder's boots left faint prints on the expensive flooring as he moved forward, calm but deliberate. "Yeah," he said, his tone low and even. "You're the man who thinks his money can silence screams." Behind him, the other bikers spread out like a wall of muscle and resolve. They didn't need weapons. Their presence alone carried enough power to make even a billionaire tremble. The air grew thick with tension, electric, dangerous, righteous. Alexander's pride wouldn't let him show fear. He stepped closer, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Get out before I have you all arrested. You're trespassing in my home." Ryder's eyes narrowed. "Home," he repeated, his voice steady. "A home is where love lives." This, he gestured toward Emma, trembling by the wall. "This is a prison." Emma's tears glistened under the chandelier, but for the first time, they weren't only from fear. They were from disbelief. Someone had come. Someone cared enough to stand between her and the man who'd destroyed her peace. Alexander lunged forward, trying to shove Ryder back, but the biker barely moved. Another member of the group, Tank, a massive man with a scarred face, stepped in front of Emma protectively. "You don't touch her again," he warned, his deep voice rumbling like thunder. The billionaire's confidence faltered. He looked around, realizing that for once, his power meant nothing here. His threats, his wealth, his lawyers, none of it could save him from the truth staring him in the face. One of the bikers pulled out his phone and began recording. "Go ahead, Crane," he said coldly. "Tell the world how powerful you are. Let's see how far your money gets you when everyone sees what you really are." Alexander's face turned pale. He froze, his composure cracking like glass. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Emma slowly rose to her feet. Her knees were weak, but her spirit wasn't. She stepped toward Ryder, her voice trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought no one would ever come." Ryder gave a small nod. "No one deserves to suffer in silence," he said softly. "Not while we're around." The bikers formed a silent circle around her, a barrier of safety and strength. For the first time in years, Emma felt what freedom might feel like, not complete yet, but close enough to touch. Alexander slumped into a chair, powerless, defeated, stripped of the illusion of control, and outside, the rain finally began to ease. Pure Hub kindness reminds us that true strength doesn't come from power or money, it comes from standing up for what's right. no matter the cost. By the time the sirens pierced the night air, the battle inside the penthouse was already over. The once untouchable Alexander Crane sat slumped on the edge of his pristine couch, his tie torn, his pride shattered. The bikers stood around him, silent and steady, as if carved from stone. Their faces were calm, not angry, not boastful, just firm in their purpose. Emma sat near the doorway, wrapped in one of the bikers' jackets. It was worn and heavy, smelling faintly of rain and leather, but it felt safer than anything she'd ever known. Her hands rested over her stomach protectively, the smallest of smiles breaking through her exhaustion. She couldn't believe that she was free. The door burst open, and 2 police officers stepped in, startled by the scene before them. Their radios crackled as they looked from the bruised woman to the defeated CEO to the row of bikers standing in silence. One officer hesitated. "What happened here?" Ryder turned his head slightly, his voice calm. "Justice," he said simply. "The kind money can't buy." The officers exchanged a look, and within minutes, Alexander Crane was handcuffed and led toward the elevator. His protests were weak now, empty threats muttered through clenched teeth. For once, no one listened. No lawyers to shield him, no influence to protect him, just the cold, heavy sound of truth finally catching up. Emma watched him go, tears glistening in her eyes. Not tears of fear, this time, but release. As the elevator doors closed, she whispered under her breath, "Goodbye." Ryder knelt beside her, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. "You don't have to look over your shoulder anymore." Her voice broke. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You already did," he said with a small smile. "You survived." Outside, dawn began to break. The city, once cloaked in darkness, slowly turned gold as the first light of morning touched the wet streets. The Ironhearts mounted their motorcycles one by one, their engines rumbling softly like the heartbeat of something powerful but kind. Before Ryder put on his helmet, he looked back one last time. Emma stood at the doorway, wrapped in that jacket, watching them with gratitude written across her face. "If you ever need us again," he called out over the engines, "you know how to find us." "I hope I never do," she replied softly. Smiling through tears, Ryder gave a nod, revved his engine, and led the group down the glistening street. The city watched in silence as they disappeared into the rising sun ghosts of justice, leaving behind only hope and courage. For days, the news spread like wildfire. The untouchable billionaire, finally exposed. People whispered about the mysterious bikers who'd stood up when no one else dared. No one knew their names, but everyone remembered their message. Because kindness doesn't always whisper. Sometimes, it roars on 2 wheels. Pure Hub kindness reminds us that when courage meets compassion, even the darkest night can give way to dawn.